Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GBNews on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake, civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes, something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah. But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Abdul Shakur Ezidi remains on the run after an alleged attack with a corrosive substance. But it makes a mockery of our asylum system as it emerges he was a convicted sect offender and claimed to be a Christian to be granted refuge. But some have suggested his asylum status is irrelevant. The Free Speech Union has warned against diversity and inclusion proposals from the two main financial regulators, which oversee thousands of British institutions. But this emerges as the Labour Party has announced it will extend the Equality Act and its much maligned effects of wokery. And speaking of unaccountable and undemocratic institutions, today we launched the Popular Conservatives, led by former Prime Minister Liz Truss, to counter this phenomenon and restore faith in genuine Conservative policies. Plus, the King was seen for the first time this afternoon since his cancer diagnosis. We will be discussing all the latest and, of course, sending our sovereign our very best wishes. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a particularly theatrical panel this evening, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the broadcaster and journalist Matthew Stadlen. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, to what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Let's start this bulletin with some breaking news just coming to us from the United States. It's actually from the US National Transportation Safety Board. They have just released some initial findings about, you may remember, that Boeing flight where the door blew off mid-flight. It was a 737 MAX 9 jet. It was mid-flight. This was January the 5th. And the findings, after their report has been published, are indicating that there were 4 key bolts missing from that door which blew off. That's according to this initial report. They're referring to photo evidence showing, they say, that bolts were missing from the door plug which had been removed to fix rivets that were damaged in the production process. So that from the US National Transportation Safety Board, just releasing its initial findings. We'll bring you more on that, of course, as it comes to us. Now, the main news of the day is that the King has arrived at the Sandringham Estate in Norfolk, having left London today. King Charles and Queen Camilla flying by a helicopter from Buckingham Palace earlier on this afternoon. And it was after a meeting with Prince Harry at Clarence House, who'd just flown in from LA. And the Duke of Sussex spent around 45 minutes, we understand, with his father. It then became apparent Prince William has no plans to meet his brother Harry whilst he is in the UK. Now, the King personally told both his sons about his cancer diagnosis before the announcement last night. Palace officials saying they hoped the King's openness about the news would help others whose lives have been affected by cancer. Well, the last known sighting of chemical attack suspect Abdul Azidi was just after 10 o'clock on Wednesday, and the Met Police today released new details about his last known sighting. They're saying Azidi passed the Unilever building and was heading towards Victoria Embankment in central London, a distance of about a mile. A £20,000 reward, they say, is still on offer for anyone with any information that leads to the suspect's arrest. He is suspected of attacking a woman and children with a corrosive substance, leaving her with potentially life-changing injuries. In the United States, a court has ruled that Donald Trump is not immune to charges that he plotted to overturn the 2020 US election. That means the former president is now one step away from a criminal trial, a move which would be unprecedented in American political history. His lawyers had argued that the former president cannot be prosecuted for what they're calling official actions, but a panel of judges has now disagreed. Mr. Trump is expected to appeal, and if he wins at the next election, he could also seek to pardon himself. Political news here at home, and today Liz Truss said democracy had become unpopular. She unveiled a new group, therefore, aimed at boosting Conservative values. The Popular Conservatives, as they're known, or PopCon, aims to take on what the former Prime Minister called left-wing extremists. The Liberal Democrats accuse some of those present at today's launch of economic vandalism, but Liz Truss later told GB News she thought left-wing ideas had gone too far. And how about this for some political views to sink your teeth into? A set of dentures once worn by Winston Churchill. Yes, they're up for auction. They were once worn by the former Prime Minister during one of his famous speeches. They were designed apparently to protect his natural lisp. They're going under the hammer in Cheltenham with an expected price of around £8,000. If you fancy signing up for GB News alerts to come straight to your phone or laptop, do scan the QR code on the screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repenteth, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. Luke 15, verse 7. The alleged crimes of Abdul Shakur Azidi have once again exposed the weakness of our asylum system, even if the conversion to Christianity is something that in principle would be welcome. The asylum seeker, currently, as far as we know, on the loose, and the prime suspect in the Clapham Alkali attack, which left a mother and two children with life-changing injuries, comes from Afghanistan, and having had his asylum application rejected twice, went on to commit a sexual offence. He then supposedly converted to Christianity as a means of eventually being granted asylum. Mr. Azidi was put on the sex offenders register for a decade, and somehow this did not suffice to block his third asylum attempt. Home Office guidelines state that sexual offences are enough to block asylum requests, but a 2020 immigration tribunal overruled this because a clergyman gave evidence that suggested he was, quote, wholly committed to Christianity. But new reports are suggesting this wasn't necessarily true. Apparently, Mr. Azidi continued to buy only halal meat after his supposed conversion, and staff at a local shop described him as a good Muslim. Despite Afghanistan being deemed unsafe for Mr. Azidi to return to, he reportedly had plans to return to the Taliban-ruled country to find a wife. And yet we're now being told that Mr. Azidi's asylum status is irrelevant to this case. A number of commentators, including some members of Parliament, have suggested this crime is a problem of misogyny. A Labour MP on Newsnight last week, a programme on the BBC, said Mr Ezidi's asylum status is, quote, not really the issue. A barrister who appeared on GBNews last week and will be joining me in a moment said this.
A crime that you can deal with just by having more people on the street because it happens so quickly. It's a crime of opportunity. What you need to deal with is the social causes of it. And this is, acid attacks are a crime of misogyny. They're about men trying to exercise control over women by reducing them to their looks and then destroying those looks. And it's only by addressing that that we're going to be able to address the crime itself.
But this crime is unequivocally about asylum for one very simple reason. Mr Ezidi should not have been in the country. And if he had been expelled, he could not have committed the crime. The only reason the crime happened is because he was here. And it's this simple point that proves that it was the failure of the asylum system that allowed the crime to take place. The Home Office's own guidelines suggest his criminal past was sufficient to reject his application, which means he ought not to have been here. It is therefore obviously the system's failure. Well, I'm very pleased now to be joined by the columnist for Perspective and barrister, whom I quoted earlier, Sam Fowle. Sam, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
You make a very interesting point about misogyny and acid or alkali attacks being about destroying women's looks and therefore an attack on women. But even if that were his motivation, if the asylum system had worked, he wouldn't have been here to do it. So his crime must surely be a failure of the asylum system.
Well, I think, firstly, we don't know what his motivation is, and I don't want to speculate about an individual case. However, you could say with any crime, if the person who committed it had not been there at that time, the crime wouldn't have happened. I think it's a distraction, though, to use this to attack the asylum system, when in reality, the overwhelming likelihood is that if he hadn't have committed an acid attack, someone else would have, because London is the capital for acid attacks in the UK, acid attacks are on the rise, and we should be addressing the root causes of acid or alkali attacks, rather than using this as an excuse to make culture war points.
But without disputing that we should try and reduce all crime generally, the easiest way to reduce crime is to stop people who shouldn't be here being here, because that crime to those individuals would not have happened if it hadn't been committed by him. Somebody may well have committed a different crime, and you're absolutely right, you can say that other crimes may be committed, but he was a sex offender. He was on the sex offenders register. Home Office guidelines said he should have been removed. And I'm afraid some gullible judge in a tribunal accepts a conversion to Christianity and allows him to stay. That's a failure of the asylum system.
Well, I don't think it is, because I think we're talking about deporting the guy to Afghanistan, which is an authoritarian, totalitarian state, arguably, where in all likelihood, if he had gone there, he would have been tortured and killed. And so I think it's absolutely mad we would think of sending anyone back there at any time.
Why would he have been tortured and killed for going back there?
Because people who run away from Afghanistan, who come back, tend to be tortured and killed, particularly if they think they are Christians.
He's reported as wanting to go back. So he wanted to go back to find a wife. So the reports coming out are that he's had a conversion of convenience to Christianity. Look at that boat where 40 people have suddenly converted to Christianity. Do you begin to believe this? Let's look at
where this evidence is coming from first. The report that this was a bogus conversion is entirely from an unnamed shopkeeper in Newcastle. Now, speaking as a barrister, if I had to run a case on that basis, I would concede, because it's not good enough evidence. So it's basically speculation.
Let's broaden it out then, because we have heard that 40 people on the Bibi, Stockholm, have converted to Christianity. And this is an extraordinary conversion rate, which doesn't seem credible. And when things seem extremely unlikely, they're probably not true.
I agree, and I think that arguably in the asylum system, like in every system, I think there is definitely bogus conversions, right? But in the case of the Bibby, this doesn't surprise me at all. This is a place where we're keeping people in such bad conditions that someone recently killed themselves just to escape. I think it's completely unsurprising that they wouldn't say absolutely anything to try and get themselves out of those conditions. And the problem there is, again, we have chosen to pursue a policy that's performative, that says, look how harsh we can be to these people, rather than actually working it out.
The Bibby Stockholm is not harsh. It's a perfectly civilised, safe place to be. It may be boring, but it's not dangerous, it's not insanitary. What conditions do people have a right to expect when they come here, beyond them being sufficient to live in?
Well, I think they have a right to expect conditions that don't drive them to suicide, which one person on the Bibby Stockholm recently experienced.
But you have suicides. I mean, you were saying on the other case that just one example doesn't prove a case. Surely that's even more true with suicide, when people do sadly commit suicide across the country, and there isn't evidence that purely being on the Bibby Stockholm was the cause of his suicide.
Well, there is evidence that first the Bibby Stockholm was unsanitary. And that
was put right, and it wasn't occupied until it was sanitary. Well, and that's quite an important point when they had the worry about Legionnaire's disease. And we look after people in this country, and I'm all in favour of that. We are a civilised country. But 40 converting to Christianity makes it likely that the system is being played. And if it is likely that the system is being played, then that creates a risk when you've got criminals who ought to be deported, who have an ability to say, and let's widen it out from the individual, an ability to say, oh, I've converted to Christianity, therefore you can't get rid of me. And then they commit crimes. This is a crazy system.
Well, I think it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory to think this is system-wide, because actually the experience of lawyers and NGO workers who are working in this system is that using Christianity is not a very effective tactic. In fact, Home Office assessors and judges are more likely to say, just don't tell anyone you're a Christian. Go back, keep it quiet, practice your faith in private. If no one knows, you're not in danger. People are also likely to be very sceptical about conversions, and so it's a foolish idea to go and give the judge or an assessor reason for scepticism straight off the bat. And in addition, they put them through these ridiculous trials in order to prove their Christianity, where they ask them, so they sort of pick random bits out of the Bible and say, can you quote this? And certainly I wouldn't be able to do that. I'm sure you would, but I certainly wouldn't.
I'm not sure I would be able to, but I do make my children learn the catechism, for better or worse. But Sam, thank you so much for coming in. I'm joined now by Graham Nichols, Director of Affinity Gospel Churches in Partnership, on the question of migrants converting to Christianity. Ms Nichols, thank you very much for joining me. Do you come across this with people converting, and do you have a feeling for whether it's genuine or whether it's to play the asylum system?
Yeah, the churches involved in Affinity do come across people who are genuinely converting from Islam to Christianity. Sometimes they were Christians abroad, and that's why they're here, because it's unsafe for them where they were living. So that's sometimes why people come into churches, because they're already Christians. Sometimes it is because they have a genuine interest and get interested and do genuinely convert. So that is certainly the experience of a lot of our churches, particularly in areas where asylum seekers end up living. So it is really hard, and we do need discernment to work out whether it's one of those two categories, already Christians or converting to Christianity, or whether they are, as you said, gaming the system. There's only so much we can do. We can't see people's hearts. We can have an instinct about people not being genuine, but that will be true whether they're asylum seekers or just people who come into the church with various not very good motives. So we're having to do that all the time, not just for asylum seekers, to work out, are these people genuine? Are they looking for help when they don't necessarily need financial help? Are they looking for relationships that are inappropriate in some way? So there's all kinds of tests that we need to run, as it were, to be wise.
And
but
it's
in
very
the
important.
End,
it's very important to remember that Christians are persecuted in a lot of countries abroad. I mean, in Pakistan, there's the risk of execution for converting to Christianity for deemed blasphemy. China persecutes Christians. There are terrible problems in Nigeria at the moment. So the persecution of existing Christians is something we should be very conscious of.
Yes, I can't know everyone's background and everything else. That's really the job of the asylum system. So I'm hoping that there's somebody looking at the bigger picture, like in this tragic case, he was a sex offender. There are other things and a pattern of behaviour where you might think, I'm not sure about this. We can't often see that as church leaders. People present on a Sunday, or they might get involved in other groups. We don't see necessarily their whole lives. But we act in good faith, and I don't want us to be branded as naive and stupid. We read the news, we see the news like everybody else, and so we are alert to the possibility that it could be bogus. But we also
To what extent do you vouch for people who are in the asylum system? Do they come to you and say, will you vouch for me? Will you say that I am a genuine Christian? Or does that not happen a great deal?
Yeah, that's not been my personal experience so much to be able to say I know this that personally how that works, but it does happen. But I think it's more exceptional, and I think, to be fair, I know there's this possibility it may have been a Baptist church, but that's just a rumour to do with this particular gentleman. But often it's in the mainstream larger denominations, more established churches, where that happens. Because I'm not sure as a free church person whether my name carries very much weight. Whereas if you're a local bishop or a vicar, I think you have more status in the community.
Well, I'm sure your name should carry weight. I read somewhere that it was the Catholic Church that gave a word for this man. So, as that's my church, I suppose I ought to take a degree of responsibility. But thank you very much for coming on this evening. Coming up next, the Financial Conduct Authority has issued diversity, equity and inclusion proposals, but they've hardly been noticed until now. Plus, the King was seen for the first time this afternoon since his diagnosis, and we will be discussing all the latest shortly.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seemed to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing illegal migration and crime, and you've been sending in some forthright views. Bill, Jacob, if there are immigrants deceiving authorities about false conversions to Christianity, it's deceitful. But if they're genuine conversions, it must be seen as a good thing. Yes, I agree with that. Jesus came for the broken-hearted, and the church is supposed to help. However, we have to uphold the law, and all immigrants still need to be vetted, whatever their faith. I hope this is not an attack on Christianity. God bless. No, Bill, you make such an important point. And it's very difficult for clergymen because they're meant to be forgiving and open and welcoming. They're not really meant to be part of the immigration system and part of a policing system. Colin says, Jacob, perhaps you could suggest to the young barrister, Dr. Sam, that the rise in acid and similar attacks in London could itself be as a result of the influx of illegal migrants. Thank you for that point. So, the Free Speech Union has warned against the two largest financial regulators in the UK, the FCA and the PRA, over their diversity and inclusion proposals. And I've had a look at some of them, and they say we consider that greater levels of diversity and inclusion can improve outcomes for markets and consumers. It also proposes reporting requirements on diversity, that firms set DEI targets and have established diversity strategies. But the regulators aren't meant to be political bodies. So why are they intervening in these contentious and politicised areas? Perhaps it's no coincidence that the FCA's chief executive was formerly a private secretary to Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, or that one of its executives was the chairman of Stonewall. New Labour's march through the institutions continues, even 14 years after it was last in government. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes, and the broadcast journalist, Matthew Stadler. Matthew, thank you very much for coming in. They're going to make people have, they're suggesting unconscious bias training. Surely this is not the job of the FCA and the PRA. They want financial institutions to get on with it.
Well, you say it's not the job, and I'd ask you in return, is it the job? I mean, is there any reason for this regulatory body not to get involved in this?
Well, I'd say that unconscious bias training isn't necessarily true. And therefore, they're doing something that's deeply speculative, and that clearly isn't their job. Their job is to say that when you're doing a discounted flat cash flow, this is how you work it out, otherwise you're not competent to be a trader. And they should be going for diversity of opinion, say that you have companies arguing within them about what the best investment is, not saying you've got to do some ridiculous course.
Do you think unconscious bias is a thing? Because I would suggest that here we are, three white men. I'm sure none of us would see ourselves as racist. I certainly don't, and I'm sure you don't either. But I humbly might suggest that I think most other human beings, suffer from some unconscious biases, and trying to unpick those and challenge those is quite an interesting
I think unconscious bias is nonsense.
For heaven's sake, unconscious. Well, if you're drunk, you can be unconscious. But I mean, unconscious bias, what's it mean? It means you have no specific intent. Microaggression. Gosh heavens, that's another thing we've got to be terribly careful. Look, you're a ginger. Oh, that's a microaggression. Oh, will I be held up in front of the Equalities Act? I probably could be on television on your watch. So,
the thing is, our experience, right, let's face it, is as white men in a majority white country. And I would like to have the humility to suggest that if we weren't white men, we might have a somewhat different experience. I'll ask you another question, Jacob. No. You, as an opponent of racism and bigotry, you would like, in a diverse society, in a diverse country, because that's what we are, you would like there to be proper representation, wouldn't you, of ethnic minorities and different races?
No, I want to employ the best people. And I ran my own.
Would you suggest that only the best people are white men?
No, of course I wouldn't.
OK, good.
Quotas. We don't want
to. But some common ground.
Yeah, of course we have. When I was running a financial services business, which I'd set up, I wanted really clever, able people. Yeah. And I didn't care about any of these indicators. I think these indicators are a terrible distraction. And they're the wrong way round, because you should view people surely as people.
Did you oppose
not through the lens of their ethnic quota filling.
But did you oppose the Equality Act, for example?
I think the Equality Act has major problems.
Would you oppose equal pay for women? Do you think women who want to be paid the same as men, if they're doing the same job...
No, it's the trade unions who oppose equal pay for women.
I think equal pay is a very reasonable approach.
Of course it is.
But actually, any sensible employer, and if you're in financial services, you care about the bottom line, and any sensible employer will pay people fairly because that gets you the best people.
Do you think all employers in this country, don't forget, of course, you were Secretary of State for Business, do you think all employers, all businesses are sensible?
I don't think they are, but I don't think that this helps. I don't think this approach helps, and I think the employers that are likely to be the most difficult are actually the very, very large companies employing thousands of people when you have a powerful employer and a weak employee. In the city, in my experience, it was the other way around. You had employees who could get jobs tomorrow, and you as the employer had to maintain their goodwill and their support by treating them properly.
So do you think there is no problem, Jacob, if you are an ethnic minority in this country when it comes to getting the same sort of treatment, the same sort of pay, or indeed equal pay, at businesses or at companies in the financial sector? But I'm asking, do you think there is any problem?
I think we should all be treated equally under the law, and we should be protected.
How do we establish that happens?
Under the law?
How do we make sure that happens?
Because there are existing protections without making people have unconscious bias training when unconscious bias may not exist.
But you're opposed. Just quickly, you are opposed, if I may, to some of these existing protections. You just said there are major problems with the Equalities Act.
There are. We had a lady on with Nigel Farage who'd been banned from Newcastle United, a football club, apparently, because she tweeted saying that a trans woman is a man. Privately, nothing to do with the football club. And that comes out of is the consequence of the Equality Act. So, yes, I think there are problems. But I want to come on to the Labour Party, because the Labour Party wants to extend this self-same Equality Act with the right to equal pay extending beyond gender and now to include racial minorities, except I thought that already existed.
It does exist.
Because racial discrimination is already illegal. So what are they getting at?
I don't understand it. It's virtue signalling. It's not going to help anyone. Thank heavens for Kemi Badenoch. We think she's rather good news.
She's
you
excellent.
may not think so, Matthew, but she is, because here is an ethnic woman, a black woman who's known poverty in Nigeria, who's there. She's always fighting for a bit of a scrap, but you know what she believes in. And I think we need people like that in the Conservative Party.
I mean, isn't Jerry right? This is just virtue signalling.
I'm not a fan of virtue signalling, and I hope it isn't. But I'm not a spokesman for the Labour Party.
What does it mean?
And clearly the Labour Party get things wrong. And when, not if, when they become the next government, I, as a journalist and as a political commentator, fully intend to hold them to account. On this, though, the suggestion is that the existing protections, we've been talking about protections already, just aren't beefy enough. And I think Kemi Badenoch, of course, is entitled to her view, and she's got a lot of power as a Secretary of State. But there are others, including Doreen Lawrence, the mother of the murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence, who thinks that more needs to be done. Should we at least not be open-minded and open-eared?
Well,
yes,
we're having
but not
a discussion
legislation.
about it.
Not legislation. See, you're right, open-minded, open-eared. But legislation? Is that the right way to do it, Matthew?
It depends whether the protections as they exist are not working. And if it is correct that they aren't, then perhaps we do need stronger legislation.
Which bits are working? Which bits are not working?
We're going to have a further discussion later. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, we'll be discussing this afternoon's events at the newly launched, the wonderful, the glorious popular Conservative group led by the former PM Liz Truss. Plus, the King's upper lip remains as stiff as ever as he meets the Duke of Sussex and was seen early this afternoon leaving the palace for Sandringham.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the seemingly unstoppable tide of diversity, equity and inclusion. And once again, you've been sending in your mail mogs. Neil says, please, please, please tell your ill-informed guest that there is equal pay already. And Tiana says, on diversity proposals, Marxism, Jacob. It's Marxism destroying capitalism, that's it. And Stephen, I don't think anyone, any company, anywhere, has the right to insist that anyone has to attend any course not directly involved with their job. I certainly would not attend any course trying to indoctrinate me in their beliefs. Well, thank you for those. They're always valuable and interesting, informative part of the programme. Earlier today, I had the pleasure of attending and speaking at the Popular Conservatives, or PopCon, launch, led by the former Prime Minister Liz Truss. The movement has one key focus: restoring democratic accountability to Britain. As I mentioned in my speech today, there are three key pieces of legislation that have obstructed British democracy over the last 25 years or so: the Climate Change Act, the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act. These three forms of law represent the lending of democratic decision-making to unelected and unaccountable bodies: the European Court of Human Rights, the Climate Change Committee and the Equality and Human Rights Commission. But also financial institutions like the Office for Budgetary Responsibility or the Monetary Policy Committee. Whenever Conservatives try to pursue genuinely conservative policies, they can be stifled by unaccountable bureaucracy. Liz Truss put it this way earlier today when asked by GB News' very own political editor, Christopher Hope.
One of the problems we have is, though we've got a Conservative government, what we're seeing in our schools, in our universities, in our corporate sector is the spreading of wokery, of left-wing ideas. The people of Britain want us to deal with the real issues. Immigration's too high, the government's too big, taxes are too high. But what we constantly hear is the left. So PopCon is about challenging that. It's about challenging the left-wing orthodoxy and making it positive to be a Conservative.
Well, I was hoping to play you on a permanent loop my own speech in the way the Potter's Wheel used to provide an interlude on the BBC, but that was thought perhaps to be a little self-indulgent. So still with me is my panel, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and the broadcaster and journalist Matthew Stadlen. Jerry, you're a Conservative. Are you popular?
Well, of course I'm popular, because I'm not a Conservative MP. I mean, popular Conservatism, it gives oxymorons a very bad name. And you and Liz Truss are going up and down the country instilling apathy in people.
Oh, you're quoting Willie Whitelaw.
Yeah, I know, of course
yes,
I am.
Yes.
Oh, you remember?
Well, I'm not sure I'm old enough to remember.
No, you remember. You read the book. Yeah, OK.
But isn't it important? There's this argument about populism and popular.
Yes.
Shouldn't politicians try to be popular? Isn't populism actually a good thing in democratic politics?
Oh, yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. The trouble is Liz Truss crashed the economy, complete and utter disaster, along with Kwasi Kwarteng, who's no longer standing for Parliament again. Why don't you guys just coalesce behind the Prime Minister?
Well, I am supporting the Prime Minister.
Well, you know,
I want him to win, and I'm very against these plots against him.
What's the point of actually... Dear old Liz Truss, everyone's going to say, look, why are you having this little party within a party, which people are just going to say, for heaven's sake.
I'm going to bring Matthew in, because I actually think it's impressive that both Liz Truss and Theresa May have remained in the front line of British politics, are arguing for the things that they believe in, when other former leaders, and one in particular, went off to advise dictators and get a lot of money for it. Actually, isn't it a good thing that people remain in politics when they've served? Because they bring some experience and the opportunity to bring people together, that it was Liz Truss's name that meant the Popular Conservative Conference could take place.
I want to be very careful not to intrude too aggressively onto the private grief of your party. I know that your former leader, William Hague, has written a piece in today's Times explaining the importance of party unity. I mean, coming from the left, and this is, I think, perhaps even more tragic than it is comedic, but the idea that a Prime Minister who was in power for not much more than
48 days.
Well, indeed, under two
Glorious
months.
days.
I couldn't quite believe what I was hearing when I watched the speech. She was saying that we don't want to worry too much about personality politics, it's fine. What people really want to know is how we are going to help them make their lives better. And you could hear the pin drop across the country as people who have been savaged by these mortgage rates, these interest rates. I know you'll defend it, but I think it is the consensus.
But those mortgage rates
really
were going up
did
anyway.
very serious damage to the economy. They may have been, but they were not helped by Liz Truss's government.
It's become clearer that the increase in mortgage rates was remarkably
I'm not sure about that, but isn't it
government.
interesting that on the very same day that Liz Truss launches this initiative, the Chancellor of the time, Kwasi Kwarteng, announced that he's stepping down from politics. I also have to say, because you're interviewing me, we could quite easily be the other way around. I know you had a little skirmish with another presenter today, Lewis Goodall, and you did uncharacteristically, Jacob, get a little bit annoyed. But let me put it to you.
No, I was trying to encourage his due impartiality when he was asking me these hard left
Jacob, you did get angry. Let me just put this to you, because I think it is important. You have talked about populism, OK?
Yes.
Now, first of all, it is for us to decide whether this particular grouping of which you are a part is popular or not. It looks a bit desperate for the popular Conservatives to call themselves popular. Let us decide. Secondly, you were railing against the elites, and this is the heart of populism. Don't mistake that for popularity. You, like me, were privately educated. You went to the most famous private school in the country. You went to one of the greatest universities in the world, Oxford University. You were at the heart of government. You were the leader of the Commons. You were Secretary of State for Business. You made a lot of money within the system, within the cabinet system. But nothing wrong with that. But you are now trying to convince the country that you are against the elites.
What I would say is I was born into the establishment. My father was editor of the Times when I was born. That's why I know how rotten it is. Because I've seen it from the inside all my life.
Jacob. Why did you accept a knighthood? If you think the establishment is rotten, why did you accept the title of
It would have been extremely ungracious to turn it round. I turn it down.
From a corrupt establishment.
But I approve of the monarchy. I'm a huge supporter of the monarchy, and the king is the fount of all honour. So
you want to be the people's representative against the establishment while accepting a knighthood?
I want fundamental change in how we are governed, and I don't want us to be taking part in the international organisations that I think undercut and undermine democracy. That's my real issue. It's not about me as an individual. It's about, does your vote change how you're governed? And the international elite, the Davos man, tries to have an international system that reduces that.
What is this international system that is hammering us in the way that you suggest it is?
Even look at what the WHO is currently doing, which I get a lot of correspondence about. It is putting forward a proposed new treaty that would mean that lockdowns could be organised by the WHO, which we know the last time round, no WHO, definitely, the World Health Organization, that is funded significantly by China and wouldn't criticise China, wouldn't even entertain the Wuhan leak theory. It wants to get powers to order lockdowns.
Can I just cut to the chase? Never mind all this stuff. At the end of the day, Jacob, you were there today, in all honesty and decency, because you believe in all this stuff. How many votes do you think Popular Conservative under Liz Truss is going to do? Are they going to say, thank heavens for Liz Truss, thank heavens for Jacob, we're now going to vote Conservative?
What I would say is that when you were an MP and Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, they voted consistently because we delivered popular Conservative policies, and that is the challenge.
No, but what is a Conservative policy? Conservative policy has always been about power. It has always been about adaptation. It always has been...
How do you keep power?
You keep power...
This is Disraeli. This is the condition of the people. Improve the condition of the people, and you keep power. This is what Disraeli did. This is what Margaret Thatcher did.
What Margaret Thatcher did with Council House
and this is what popular Conservatism is about.
And what did Liz Truss do for power? Improving people's lives? She did nothing.
The Bank of England bungled. I'm afraid we've got to move on. I am sorry. We are out of time. My panel thought that these discussions wouldn't be interesting, and now I can't shut them up. Anyway, thank you to my panel. Coming up, we'll be discussing all the latest news on King Charles's diagnosis of cancer, as it was seen earlier today. Oh, plus some prehistoric news. You know I like prehistoric news from the Isle of Skye.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, a big exclusive on the Muslim vote, a new movement set to send shockwaves through the next general election. Another exclusive for you on the BBC wasting your money whilst they prosecute people over the licence fee. I've investigated the role of the Church of England in bogus asylum claims. Nigel Farage joins me for the latest immigration madness. And King Charles has cancer, but should he abdicate? David Starkey on that. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been discussing Labour's new race and equality law and popcorn, and you've been getting in touch. And John says, you say we have a clear choice at the next election. I disagree. We have two hyenas competing for the crown at the next election. One has more hair than the other. This is not a clear choice. It is splitting hairs. I'm fascinated by these hairy hyenas. Anyway, a day after the King's diagnosis was made public, His Majesty has gone to Sandringham after a much-anticipated visit from the Duke of Sussex at Buckingham Palace, perhaps even Clarence House. And the King went from Buckingham Palace then by helicopter to Sandringham. And as you probably know, it's a peculiar coincidence that today is the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's accession after the King's grandfather, King George VI, died 72 years ago at Sandringham from cancer at the age of 56. So if we come on to the visit of the Duke of Sussex, is this an opportunity for reconciliation? And does the slimmed-down royal family need to be fattened up a bit? Well, I'm joined now by the royal biographer, Angela Levin. Angela, we keep on meeting like this, and it's always a pleasure. But the slimmed-down royal family doesn't have a lot of resources. Wouldn't it be a good thing if the Duke of Sussex came back and carried out royal duties?
Yeah, but that's a very nice sentence to hear, but to put it into action, I think, is very, very difficult indeed. Harry doesn't like to compromise anymore. He used to years ago. He doesn't like to do that. He's determined to get apologies from his father for not treating Meghan, he felt, properly or giving him enough backbone. And also, Meghan would be absolutely furious if he started becoming very sweet and nice with his family, because she's a destroyer. She's not somebody who makes things up. So it's, I think it sounds lovely, but I don't think that's at all possible. And I think as well that the fact that he only stayed for about 30 minutes with his father and Camilla, who I'm absolutely sure stayed with them because she has done in the past when he's come, bludgering in. I think it shows you that they're going to carry on in their own way and not get upset or determined or feel uncomfortable with him.
But when you're visiting somebody who isn't well, you don't necessarily want to overstay your welcome. Doesn't half an hour seem about the right length of visit to somebody who is undergoing serious treatment?
Yes, you're right again then. But, however, when Harry has come over in the last 3 years, which hasn't been often, would drop everything, including his father, so he could see him for as long as he wanted to get these apologies. And I imagine that if he tried to do that, they shut it down. I think he could have been there longer, quieter, but not made any demands. But he's full of demands. And I think that they actually flew off in a helicopter. They could have made that later because he's in no hurry at the moment. The King is in no hurry. And I just think you have to realise how Harry has changed and what a very difficult man he now is.
Isn't the gesture of coming all the way from California, which is a long old way away, going through several time zones, rather impressive? Shows a proper sense of filial piety.
It depends which way you look at it, isn't it? There could be something that he heard about his father, dashed to be here to look after him or be kind, or it's because to show everyone in America that he's very nice and get his popularity moved up because it's very low at the moment.
All right, well, thank you, Angela. We may talk again tomorrow. Still with me is my panel, barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the broadcaster and journalist Matthew Stadland. Matthew, don't you think everyone would be quite pleased if they had Prince Harry back and that you could extend the royal family again and have more royal duties carried out?
Those who care about the royal family, I'm sure would be. I hope would be. I would be in a very loose sense. But I'm not sure this is really the time to be picking over the bones of that relationship. And let's hope there is flesh on the bones. My thoughts are actually with the King and with Camilla and also with Harry and William, because this is a really upsetting and difficult time. We all hope that the diagnosis, the prognosis is good. But, you know, this is a man who has been waiting for that moment to be king for decade after decade. He was doing a lot of useful things, I would argue, during that time. He's only been king now for a year and a quarter. He was only crowned a few months ago, and suddenly he's hit with this diagnosis. So I think the majority of people won't be so worried about what's happening between him and his son. They'll wish them well.
They'll wish them well.
Yeah, they'll wish them well. But above all, they want the king to recover.
And I agree with that completely.
So right. This is about a father and a son. This is about forgiveness. This is about atonement. This is probably about unfinished business. We don't know how serious it is. But the mere fact that he came over, I think Angela was a little unkind to suggest that it was a publicity stunt. He loves his father. Obviously, they've fallen out for all sorts of reasons.
Matthew's point absolutely right, that we also want the king to do well because of the long wait he had to become king, and that he's got it, he should enjoy it.
We
He's
both
entitled
know him.
to enjoy
He's
it.
He's a good man.
Well, I wouldn't claim to know him. I've had the honour of meeting him, but I wouldn't claim to know him.
But also we see ourselves in him. You know, one of the functions, I think, of a monarchy, and this goes back to the ancient Greeks, to the tragedies, to Shakespeare as well. You know, if the king or the monarch, the ruler was destabilised, if something happened, the state became unstable. That's no longer the case here. We are a fully fledged democracy. But I think we see a bit of ourselves reflected, whether that might be the squabbles that sometimes break out, that we sometimes get tidbits about, but more fundamentally about how they act as a monarch. And when they get a diagnosis like this, there isn't a family up and down our great land who cannot relate on some level, because we've all been touched by cancer, whether it's in our family or amongst our friends. And I think the fact that the king has been so open about this is really helpful.
It's groundbreaking, actually.
Yes.
Groundbreaking.
As always, God save the king, and thank you to my panel. Now for some lighter news from the Isle of Skye, which is renowned for its natural beauty with its enchanting fairy pools of crystal water, the Kilt Rock and Milt Waterfall. But imagine all this scenery about 150 million years ago, when I was still quite young, with vast prehistoric reptiles, not Tory MPs, gliding across the landscape. Indeed, a new species, a flying dinosaur, the Scioptera evansae, has been discovered by paleontologists in this Scottish island. Well, I think I was at school with the Cleopatra event. Much to my panel, that's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare tonight? Have you got any dinosaurs joining you in the studio?
No, the Mogosaurus Rex is all that I need, Jacob. But no, a show stacked full of exclusives tonight. One about the Muslim vote, a concerted campaign now to mobilise that Muslim vote. Massive impact predicted at the next general election. I also reveal the damning document which raises serious questions as to whether or not the Church of England is responsible for illegal immigration. Another exclusive about a BBC wasting your money, and the Rwanda files as well. Nigel Farage explaining all of those. See you at 9.
Oh, well, that's going to be absolutely excellent. You have such interesting people coming on and important stories to discuss, so people will be glued to that. That'll be coming up after the weather. I will be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you know what the weather in Somerset's going to be like. There will be blue skies and sunshine. You'll have Morecambe and Wise singing Give Me Sunshine in Somerset tomorrow.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. I'm Alex Deakin. Tonight, some snowy weather across northern Scotland and some rain across the south. That'll slowly be clearing by dawn from this weather front that's pushing its way steadily southwards. A set of weather fronts, really, and it's introducing the colder air further north. It's been very windy and snowy across Shetland today. The snow showers easing, the winds easing, but then more sleet and snow comes in across the Highlands and the Western Isles through the night. Could turn things pretty icy here as well. Further south, it'll be rain that sinks its way across South Wales and southern England. keeping the temperatures up here, but will still be a colder night than last night. Certainly colder further north with a fairly extensive frost from northern England northwards. That's why it could be icy. It could be a few flurries through the central belt, but that band of sleet and snow is tending to ease off as we go through the morning. More snow showers in northern Scotland through the day. The patchy rain in the south making for a grey start, but it should clear away. And for many, it's a dry and a bright day tomorrow, actually, with some decent spells of sunshine. But it is going to be cold, certainly colder than recent days in the south, with single digits as a high. And with the cold air in place and more wet weather pushing north on Thursday, a greater risk of some snow over Wales, northern parts of the Midlands, northern England and Northern Ireland. A lot on the hills, but even some at low levels that could cause some disruption. Still a bit of uncertainty about the detail. Check out the latest warnings on the Met Office website.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you?